Chapter 15. Aragog. Summer was creeping over the grounds around the castle. Sky and the lake was still turned periwinkle blue, and the flowers, large cabbage, burst into bloom in the greenhouse, but with no Hagrid visiting or visible from the castle window. Striding to the grounds with Fang and on their heels, the scene didn't look right to Harry. No better, in fact, than the inside of the castle, where things were horribly wrong. Harry and Ron had tried to visit Hermione, but visitors were now barred from the hospital wing. "We can't take any more chances," Madame Pomfrey told them, severely, through the infirmary door. "No, I'm sorry. There's every chance that this attacker might come again to finish these people off." With Dumbledore gone, fear had spread like never before, so that the sun was warming the castle walls outside seemed to stop at the mullioned windows. There was barely a face to be seen in the school that didn't look worried or tense, and any laughter that rang through the corridor sounded shrill and unnatural and was quickly stifled. Harry constantly repeated Dumbledore's final words to himself. "I will only truly have left the school when none of here are loyal to me. Help will always be given to Hogwarts to those who ask for it." But what good was those words? Who exactly were they supposed to ask for help? And everyone was just as confused and scared as they were. Hagrid's hint about the spiders was far more easier to understand. The trouble was, there didn't seem to be a single spider left in the castle to follow. Harry looked everywhere. He went and helped us rather reluctantly by Ron, but hampered, of course, by the fact that they weren't allowed to wander off on their own, and they had no move around the castle with the pack of the other Gryffindors. Most of the fellow students seemed glad that they were being shepherded from one class to another by teachers, but Harry found it irksome. The people, however, seemed to thoroughly to be enjoying the atmosphere of terror and suspicion. Of course, it was Draco Malfoy was strutting around the school as though he had just been appointed head boy. Harry didn't realize what he was so pleased about until the potions lesson about 2 weeks after Dumbledore and Hagrid had left, when he was sitting right behind Malfoy. Harry overheard him gloating to Crabbe and Goyle. "I always thought that my father would be the one to get rid of Dumbledore," he said, not troubling to keep his voice down. "I told you he thinks Dumbledore's the worst headmaster of the school ever had. Maybe now we'll get a decent headmaster. Now, someone who won't let the Chamber of Secrets or keep the Chamber of Secrets closed. McGonagall won't last for long. She's only filling in." Swept past Harry, making no comment about Hermione's empty seat in the cauldron. "Sir," said Malfoy loudly, "sir, why don't you apply for the headmaster's job?" Now, Malfoy," said Snape, though he couldn't suppress his thin lips, smiled. "Professor Dumbledore's only been suspended by the governors. I dare say he'll be back with us soon enough." "Yeah, right," said Malfoy, smirking. "I expect you'd have my father's vote, sir, if you wanted to apply for the job. I'll tell my father you're the best teacher here, sir." Snape smirked as he swept off the dungeon, fortunately not spotting Seamus Finnegan, who was pretending to vomit in his cauldron. "I'm quite surprised that the mudbloods haven't all packed up their bags by now," Malfoy went on. "Bet you 5 galleons that the next one dies. Pity it wasn't Granger." The bell rang at that moment, which was lucky for Malfoy at last words. Ron leapt off the stool and scrambled to collect his bags and books. His attempt to reach Malfoy went unnoticed. "Let me at him," Ron growled, as Harry and Dean hung on to his arms. "I don't care. I don't need my wand. I'm going to kill him with my bare hands." "Hurry up. I've got to take you all to herbology," barked Snape over the class heads, and off they marched, with Harry, Ron, and Dean bringing up the rear. Ron was still trying to get loose. It was only safe to let go of him when Snape had seen them out of the castle. and they were making their way to the vegetable patch toward the greenhouse. Their biology class was very subdued. They were now two missing from their number, Justin and Hermione. Professor Sprout set them all to work, pruning with the Alabastian silver figs. Harry went up to grab an armful of withered stalks onto the compost pile, and he found himself face to face with Ernie Macmillan. Ernie took a deep breath and said, very formally, "I just wanted to say, Harry, that I am sorry I ever suspected you. I know you'd never attack Hermione Granger, and I apologize for all this stuff. I said, we're all in the same boat now, and well," he held out a pudgy hand for Harry, and Harry shook it. Ernie and his friend Hannah came to work with us, shivering as Harry and Ron. "That Draco Malfoy character, though," said Ernie, breaking off dead twigs. "He seems very pleased about all this, doesn't he? Do you think he might be the Slytherin heir?" "That's clever of you," said Ron, who didn't seem to have given Ernie the same forgive Ernie readily as Harry. "Do you think it's Malfoy, Harry?" Ernie asked. "No," said Harry so firmly that Ernie and Hannah stared. A second later, Harry spotted something. Several large spiders were scuttling off the ground of the side of the glass, moving in an unnatural straight line, as though they were taking the shortest route to a prearranged meeting. Harry hit Ron on the hand with his pruning shears. "Ouch! What are you—" Harry pointed at the spiders, following the progress with his eyes screwed up against the sun. "Oh, yeah," said Ron, failing to look pleased. "But we can't follow them now." Ernie and Hannah were listening curiously. Harry's eyes narrowed as he focused on the spiders. If he pursued their fixed course, there could be no doubt that they were where they would end up. "Looks like they're heading towards the Forbidden Forest," said Ron, looking even more unhappy about that. At the end of the lesson, Professor Sprout escorted the class to the Defense of Doc Oz lessons. Harry and Ron lagged behind the others so they could talk out of earshot. "We'll have to use the invisibility cloak again," Harry told Ron. "We can take Fang with us. He's used to going into the forest with Hagrid. He might be of some help." "Right," said Ron, who was twirling his wand nervously in his fingers. Aren't there aren't there supposed to be werewolves in the forest?" he added, and they looked unusual places at the back of Lockhart's classroom. Preferring not to answer the question, Harry said, "Well, there are good things in there, too. Centaurs are all right, and the unicorns." Ron had never been into the Forbidden Forest before. Harry had, though, only once, and hoped he'd never have to do it again. Lockhart bounded into the room in the class and acted on him, and every other teacher in the place was looking grimmer than usual. But Lockhart, oh, he appeared nothing short of buoyant. "Come now," he cried, beaming around. "Why all these long faces?" People swapped exasperated looks, but nobody answered. "Don't you realize, people realize," said Lockhart, speaking slowly, as though they were a bit dim, "the danger has passed. The culprit has been taken away." "Says who?" said Dean Thomas loudly. "Oh, my dear young man, the Ministry of Magic has taken Hagrid if he was not 100% sure he was guilty," said Lockhart, in the tone of someone explaining what 1 plus 1 made 2. "Oh, yes, he would," said Ron, even more loudly than Dean. "I flatter myself I know so a touch more about Hagrid's arrest than you do, Mr. Weasley," said Mr. Lockhart, half-satisfied tone. Ron started to say he didn't think so. Somehow it stopped mid-sentence when Harry kicked him under the desk. "We weren't there, remember?" Harry muttered. But Lockhart's disgusting cheeriness, his hints that he had always thought Hagrid was no good, his confidence that the whole business was now to an end, irritated Harry so much that he yearned to throw the gadding with ghouls right at Lockhart's stupid face. Instead, he was contented himself with scrawling notes to Ron. "Let's do it tonight." Ron read the message, swallowed hard, looked sideways at the empty seat, usually filled by Hermione. The sight seemed to stiffen his resolve, and he nodded. The Gryffindor common room was always very crowded these days, because from 6 o'clock onward the Gryffindors had nowhere else to go. They also had plenty to talk about, with the result of the common room often empty until near past midnight. Harry went to get the invisibility cloak out of his trunk right after dinner, and he sat upon it that evening, sitting on it. Waiting for the room to clear, Fred and George challenged Harry and Ron to a few games of exploding snap, and Ginny, who was watching them very subdued, in Hermione's unusual chair. Harry and Ron kept losing on purpose, trying to finish the game quickly. But even so, it was well past midnight when Fred and George and Ginny finally went to bed. Harry and Ron waited for in the distant sounds of the two dormitory doors closed before seizing the cloak, throwing it over themselves and climbing through the portmanteau. It was another difficult journey through the castle, dodging all the teachers. At last, they reached the entrance hall and slid back into the lock on the oak front doors. They squeezed between them, trying not to stop the creaking, and stepped into the moonlight grounds. "Course," said Ron abruptly as they strode across the black grass, "we might get to the forest and find there's nothing to follow. Those spiders might not have been going anywhere there at all. I know it looked like they were but moving, but sort of general direction, but—" His voice trailed away hopefully. They reached Hagrid's house, sad and sorry looking, with its blank windows. When Harry pushed the door open, Fang went mad with joy at the sight of them. Worried he might make everyone in the castle with his deep, booming box, he hastily fed him treacle toffee from the tin of the mantelpiece, with his teeth glued shut together. Harry left the invisibility cloak at Hagrid's table. There would be no need for the pitch-dark forest. "Come on, Fang. We're going for a walk," said Harry, patting his leg, and Fang bounded happily, and the house behind them, dashed to the edge of the forest, and lifted his leg against a large sycamore tree. Harry took out his wand and murmured "Luminous," and a light appeared at the end of it, just enough to let them watch the path, a sign for spiders. "Good thinking," said Ron. "I'd light mine too, but, it'd probably blow up or something." Harry tapped Ron on the shoulder, pointing to the grass. Two solitary spiders were hurrying away from the wonderlight into the shade of the trees. "Okay," Ron sighed, as though resigned to the worst. "I'm ready. Let's go." So Fang, scampering around them, sniffing the tree roots and the leaves, entered the forest. By the glow of Harry's wand, they followed a steady trickle of spiders moving about the long path. They walked behind them for about 20 minutes, not speaking, listening hard for the noises other than breaking twigs and rustling leaves. Then the trees had become thicker and as ever, so the stars overhead were no longer visible, and Harry's wand shone alone in the sea of dark, and they saw the spiders' guides leaving up the path. Harry paused, trying to see where the spiders were going, but everything outside his little sphere of light had went pitch black. He had never been this deep into the forest before. He could vividly remember Hagrid advising him not to leave the forest path last time he'd been in here, but Hagrid was miles away now. He could vividly remember Hagrid. My Hagrid was miles away now, probably sitting in his cell in Azkaban, and he had also had to follow the spiders. Something wet touched Harry's hand, and he jumped backwards, crushing Ron's foot, but it was only Fang's nose. "What do you reckon?" Harry said to Ron. "Those eyes could make out a reflecting of the light of his wand." "We've come this far," said Harry. So they followed the darting shadows of the spiders into the trees. They couldn't move very quickly now. There were no tree roots and stumps in their way, barely visible near the blackness. Harry could feel Fang's hot breath in his hand. More than once they had to stop so that Harry could crouch down and find spiders in the wand light. They walked for what seemed like half an hour. their robes snagging on the low-hanging branches and brambles. After a while they noticed the ground seemed to be sloping downward. Through the trees there was as thick as ever. Fang suddenly let loose a great echoing bark, mocking both Harry and Ron, making both Mary and Ron jump out of the skins. "What?" said Ron loudly, looking around in the pitch dark and gripping Harry's elbow very hard. "There's something moving over there," Harry breathed. "Listen. Sounds like something big." They listened. Something in the distance to their right. The something big was snapping branches, and it carved a path through the trees. "Oh no," said Ron. "Oh no, 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 no. Oh no, no. Shut up," said Harry frantically. It'll hear you." "Hear me?" said Ron, unnaturally high voice. "It's already heard Fang." The darkness seemed to be presiding over their eyeballs as they stood terrified, waiting. There was a strange rumbling noise and then silence. "What do you think it's doing?" said Harry. "Probably getting ready to pounce," said Ron. They waited, shivering, hardly daring to move. "Do you think it's gone?" Harry whispered. "Dunno." They On to their right came a sudden blaze of light, so bright the darkness both of them flung up their hands to shield their eyes. Fangs yelped and tried to run, but it lodged in a triangle of thorns and yelped even louder. "Harry!" Ron shouted, his voice breaking with relief. "Harry! It's our car!" "What? Come on!" Harry blundered over to Ron towards the light, rumbling and tipping the movement later, and then emerged into the clearing. Mr. Weasley's car was standing empty in the middle of the circle of the thick under roof under the dense branches, headlights ablaze, exactly like a large turquoise dog greeting its owner. "It's been here all the whole time," Ron said delightedly, walking around the car. "Look at it! The forest turned it wild." The sides of the car were scratched and smeared with mud. Apparently, it had been taken to a trundling around in the forest on its own. Fang didn't seem at all keen on it. He kept very close to Harry, who could feel him quivering, his breath slowing again, and Harry stuffed his warm back into his robes.